I can't say no to you. I've known you my whole career. I can't say no to Jeff. No one can say no to him.
Jeff Gurian.
Jeffrey Gurian.
Jeff Gurian. Hell yeah.
I love this guy.
How I got into comedy is a crazy story. I was driving a Pimpmobile at the time, and I drove it up to Saturday Night Live, and I threw the doorman a few bucks, and I said, "Watch my car, Lorne Michaels is expecting me." Lorne Michaels had never heard of me.
Dentistry is his day job, but at night he's a comedy writer for some of the biggest comedians in show business.
You're on a prank show called Too Much Tuna, Jeff. Whether you like it or not.
No, I'm not. Yeah, I've been in the comedy world for decades. Look, it's me and Mitch Hedberg. I don't get back behind my computers too often, but Richard Lewis, my dear friend Richard Lewis, you know. Jackie Mason, I wrote a movie for Jackie Mason about a tough Jewish neighborhood. He played a bumbling Jewish Inspector Clouseau kind of a guy. When I wrote for Rodney, Rodney was the first big star I wrote for. Remember Phil Hartman? Phil Hartman, that's him sitting at my piano in my living room. Phil Hartman and I were dear friends. I used to write for Phil.
Love Gurian. He's a comedy New York staple. You have to have him.
You actually do know everybody in the comedy world, don't you?
You have more access to more people than anyone I know in comedy.
Jeffrey is the bridge from the Catskills to YouTube comedy. You know what I mean? If you try to connect any of these people, somewhere in that link is going to be Jeffrey Gurian.
So it was me and Kevin Hart, Jerry, Woody, Hassan Minhaj, dear friend Hassan Minhaj. I wound up with a big ego monument to myself, a house full of pictures. And you'll notice that in some of the pictures, I even let someone else be in the picture. They're not just of me. But if you look along, you know, Phil Hartman, well, I want to show you in the other room, but, you know, Judy Gold, Chevy Chase, Phil Hartman. Here's Jim Gaffigan when he first came to New York. Pete Holmes, I got to do an episode of Crashing that we shot at the Comedy Cellar. That was really fun. Lorne Michaels, because since the time, you know, how I got started, I drove up to Saturday Night Live in a Pimpmobile, a mandarin orange Cadillac Eldorado that I had put a Rolls-Royce grill on. It had been made for one of the Isley brothers. And I was making films on the street at the time, little Super 8 comedy films, things like false news items, like several men were arrested for smearing cream cheese on the ankles of elderly women who wore their stockings rolled down like bagels. You ever see the old women with the stockings around their ankles? It looked like bagels to me. So I got my grandmother. My grandmother had such a great sense of humor. And she made believe she had a Jewish accent. And she said, you know, in the Jewish religion, we have two kinds of stockings, one for milk and one for meat. And this crazy man, he smeared cream cheese on my meat stockings, and I can't get it off. And I zoomed in on the ankles with the cream cheese. To this day, Alan Zweibel says he can't get that image out of his mind. It's probably 40 years. He remembers cream cheese on the ankles. So I drove up to Saturday Night Live, because in those days, there was no terrorism. You could drive right up to the front of the building on 30 Rock, and I threw the doorman a few bucks, and I said, watch my car, Lorne Michaels is expecting me. Lorne Michaels had never heard of me. I snuck past the security, I got up to Saturday Night Live, I met Alan Zweibel, showed him my films, and he introduced me to his manager, David Jonas, who at the time was managing Freddie Prinze, and all the guys who went on to do Catskills on Broadway. And that's how I got started, because Alan was kind enough to call his manager for me. And I'll be seeing Alan in a couple of weeks. I'm performing at the Borscht Belt Festival in Ellenville, New York on July 26th, and Alan will be up there doing something special. And I was just in a documentary about Grossingers. If you ever heard of Grossingers, it was a huge hotel. I think it closed in 1986, but all the big comedians, before there were comedy clubs, comedians performed in the Catskill Mountains at these gorgeous hotels, the Concord, Grossinger's and all. And so Bobby Friedman from Bungalow Entertainment and his team made a documentary about Grossinger's called We Met at Grossinger's. And I'm in it several times talking about my days, because I was there 2 times in my life. I was there as a little kid because I sang in a choir. I sang solo in a choir. And Jenny Grossinger, who was the owner of Grossinger's, took a liking to me. I was like 10 years old. From 10 to 13 I sang, and then I was there as an adult writing comedy for all the stars of that era. I would go backstage and meet them, and that's how I got, Milton Berle was my sponsor in the Friars Club. I got to work with Jerry Lewis and Sid Caesar and Henny Youngman and Red Buttons, all the greats from the Golden Age, which are on the walls that are coming up.
What's the most awkward moment you've had meeting someone famous?
There was a story. I did a stupid thing. I was supposed to do films for Saturday Night Live. I had showed them, I had a meeting. Do you know the name Herb Sargent? Herb Sargent was the main writer for Saturday Night Live probably for 30 years. And when he saw my stuff, Jack Rollins, who was Woody Allen's manager, when I wrote the movie I Am Woody, I showed it to Jack Rollins, and Jack said, there are lines in here that Woody could have written himself. Woody Allen was always my idol and my inspiration, and I met him, I didn't show you that picture, I met him in my 3rd year of dental school. Here's me and Woody. He almost smiled here, not quite though. I made him laugh that night. I hadn't seen him in so many years, and his best friend, John Dumanian, brought me over to reintroduce me to him. And I was about to say to him, hi Woody, I'm a very good friend of Jack Rollins, who was Woody's manager forever and produced all of Woody's films, Rollins and Jaffe. But at the very last second, I said to him, hi Woody, I'm a very good friend of yours. And he just busted out laughing. And he goes, really, how long do we know each other? And I'm like, forever, we're very tight, And and he was laughing so hard at that, but here he was very, very solemn. And he was, my comedic idol. I couldn't believe that I met him, and he inspired me to do films. He sat with me and he read my earliest material.
Whoa.
So
did he give notes?
He just said to me, your stuff is very visual and you should think of making a film out of it, which I did some years later. I made a series of films for the Toyota Comedy Festival. The Men Who series, about men who do very unusual things, like men who take a pitchfork to the movies, men who enjoy Latin dancing with tools. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people dance with tools. I had a guy do the tango with a wrench that was unbelievable. And he did the merengue with an extension ladder. So I had all these films. So I got to show them to Jack Rollins, and Jack said to me, this stuff is amazing. He called Herb Sargent on my behalf and asked Herb to meet with me. So they set up a meeting for me with a man named John Head, who was in charge of film acquisition for Saturday Night Live. And I brought up my films, and I was stupid enough to bring this girl with me as my date. Who brings a date on a business conference? Trying to be a big shot. It was a big lesson for me, a big lesson for me. No one invites you by who's on your arm. They invite you because they want you to come, right? So I show up with this girl, and Dennis Miller is there, and I'm doing comedy news, and Dennis is doing comedy news. And I knew Dennis from hanging out at Columbus Cafe. And he said to me, can I sit in on your meeting? And I thought, oh yeah, great, this is so exciting. He just wanted to meet the girl. So he sits in on the meeting, they're all watching, everybody's laughing. I have this whole reel of films that I did. And at the end of the meeting, John Head says to me, I see no reason why you shouldn't be doing films for the show. I'm going to set up a meeting for you with Lorne Michaels. He says, call me on Monday. I'm so excited, right? That weekend, Dennis Miller took her number. They went out together with, I think, with Billy Crystal and Robin Williams. And as a matter of fact, Jack Rollins wanted Billy Crystal to play me in a sitcom about a dentist who wanted to be in show business. That's how I met Billy originally. And that's how I met Robin Williams, through his manager. He made sure that they knew me, that he introduced us. So.
And that's your life story, right? The dentist situation. Just so it's clear. That's your real life.
That I have multiple careers. That I was a dentist during the day, and at night I was in the comedy world. And nobody knew. I kept it a secret. Well, Joan Rivers figured it out. But
how'd she figure it out?
She called me one morning early at my office. My nurse had strict instructions: never interrupt me with a patient unless it's for show business. So she would come in and she'd say, Dr. Rivers is on the phone, Dr. Lewis is calling, if Richard Lewis called me, or Jerry Lewis. The only one no one believed was Dr. Dangerfield. No one ever could believe that there was a Dr. Dangerfield. So she calls me one morning, she goes, Dr. Rivers is on the phone, and I'm like, okay. Joan calls me from Las Vegas, and she's like, what do you do during the day? And I said, I work. And she said, well, obviously you work. What is it that you do? So I knew she knew, because the New York Times had done a story about me, and there was a lot of TV stuff about my two careers. So I said to her, is this concerning the vicious rumor going around that I'm a dentist? I said, you know, Joan, I've heard of accusing people of a lot of things, but that's really low. And she's like, why didn't you tell me? And I said, because no one hires you in show business because you're a dentist. They hire you in spite of the fact. It's not exactly a prerequisite, you know? So she busted me. She found out what my day job was. You know, I told her I couldn't get a job as a waiter, so I went to dental school, you know? So anyway, so I never got the thing at Saturday Night Live. He never took my calls, and I had to live with that for a lot of years. But I learned that not everything works out the way it's supposed to. But it was my own fault to try to look like a big shot. Is Henny Youngman, Sid Caesar, Gene Bayless, Jan Murray, Norm Crosby, and what the fuck am I doing on the end?
And all these memories, these little frames, you must miss these memories all the time, right?
I see them every day, you know? It's amazing to me. I don't remember what I did this morning, but just the fact that I remember all these stories, they're so poignant to me. They're so pertinent, so important. My pictures are kind of separated by decades, you know? And so these are the earliest pictures, this wall and the wall over here. But this is me and Milton Berle in LA in 1985. You'll recognize my 80s porno mustache that I have. It's like a big caterpillar, you know? People used to think I was Geraldo Rivera. And when I met him, we took pictures together. It was funny. So I got to work with all the greats from the golden age, you know, George Burns, and all these guys lived to be very old ages, you know. Milton was 93, I believe. George Burns made it to 100. Red Buttons was in his 90s. Here's Jackie Mason. Sid Caesar, if you remember Sid Caesar, Woody Allen was one of his writers, you know. Amazing. So this was taken at the Sid Caesar roast, and that was the first time I wrote for 5 different people on the Sid Caesar roast. Sammy Davis, that was like a great thing. In those days I was wearing a lot of jewelry, and he was always known for wearing a lot of jewelry, and I was wearing so much jewelry that he made fun of me for wearing so much jewelry. Let me see who else you might know.
Do you feel like celebrities changed over the years? Like, the act of being famous, like do you think these celebrities are more celebrities than now?
That's a very, very true thought. There's a lot of depression in the comedy world, particularly. I can speak about that more than any other area of entertainment. But stars were different. Years ago, you couldn't even hope to meet stars. They weren't accessible. These days with social media, every star is accessible. People aren't as excited anymore, you know, and these guys were happier. They all lived into their 90s. Comedy years ago was a whole different thing. And I really believe that laughter, you know, they always say laughter is the best medicine. I'm on the board of this group called Laugh MD. We bring comedy to people in hospitals and people in recovery. You know, people need to laugh. But the stars from yesterday lived to very old ages, you know. There's Red Buttons, Tom Bosley, Jerry Lewis. I got to write with Jerry Lewis, and it was a great experience. People thought that he was like a hard guy to get along with, but it always depends on the way that you meet the person. We spent 2 nights together in his hotel room working on material for his roast. And while I was with him, he got a phone call that they discovered the gene that caused the Duchenne form of muscular dystrophy. And he started crying. Tears were rolling down his face. And it was just me and him to share that moment. It's pretty amazing. I had another moment like that. I was sitting with Jeffrey Ross having lunch in Montreal when they came over. A man came over and told him that his film Patriot Act won some big award. And it was just me and him sitting there. And it happened a couple of times. Dean Edwards, I was with him when he found out that he got Saturday Night Live. You know, those are very special moments, you know. And I feel like I was there for that particular moment in time. Very interesting. So on this wall...
Do you know when you're meeting like a generational talent? Can you feel it when you meet certain people?
I met Seinfeld before he was famous, and I knew he was going to be huge. He was always so different and so funny. I remember meeting him at Caroline's, when Caroline's was on, I think, 28th and 7th Avenue. This must have been in the early 80s, maybe, late 70s. But I know it was before, because I remember offering to introduce him to David Jonas, but he didn't need the help. But, you know, I saw him and Paul Reiser that night, and I knew both of them were going to be big. And yeah, I got that feeling like Mark Normand, Andrew Schultz. When I see these guys, it's exciting for me because I know them from when they started. Chris DiStefano, amazing, you know. We used to do open mics together. And look, he's headlining. He's going to be at Madison Square Garden September 11th. So how awesome is that, right? There's me and Jerry Lewis, Pat Cooper. I got to write for Pat Cooper, you know, and Buddy Hackett. That was amazing. That's a fun story, and I got to tell it to his son, Sandy Hackett. The Friars Club told me to call Buddy. Buddy was going to be the roast master. And they always gave me permission to contact them, tell them that I'm from the Friars Club and I want to help them prepare for the roast. Well, Buddy got very insulted that the Friars Club would think that he would need help. And he may have had a little too much to drink that day and he wasn't in a good mood. And he hung up. He was very annoyed and he hung up. I tried to tell him, I said, it's not my idea. I didn't get your number out of nowhere. They told me to call you. At the roast, he came over and he apologized to me. And we sat down together and had a chat. And he said he was sorry, it was just an off day. And he didn't realize what was happening and who I was. And we became friends and we took that picture. And so his son Sandy was doing a show about his dad and we spoke and he said, I love that story. It's a great story. That's my Buddy Hackett story. You know, when Paul Sorvino, he used to hang out at Columbus Cafe, which was a big thing in the late 80s and 90s. There's never been another place like it. It was like Spago in LA, big celebrity hangout. Schwarzenegger would be there, Stallone. It was on 69th and Columbus. It's where I met Mike Tyson, and you know, a funny story with Mike Tyson. The night he met Robin Givens, I was talking to her downstairs and he pushed me out of the way and he picked her up and put her over his shoulder and walked out of the club. It was really funny that of all people, I'm going to have I have beef with Mike Tyson, right? Perfect.
Being in this so long, you must hear all types of ideas that never come around.
Oh yeah, of course. Most things never happen in comedy. That's why I won't be specific, but the video that I just showed you, that sizzle reel, who knows if it's going to happen? You know what? My spiritual training teaches me if it's supposed to happen, it'll happen. And if it's not supposed to happen, something else will happen. So, you know, I'm comfortable with it.
Well, it must be also crazy because so many of these people passed. Like,
yeah, that's weird for me too.
What's weird is like how stardom, you think you're gonna be remembered forever, and it kind of slowly fade. You know, kind of.
Well, look, Russell Peters is so famous, and yet I meet people who don't know him. He fills Madison Square Garden. He makes $20 million a year. And they say he's the most famous comedian no one ever heard of. It's unbelievable. It's a crazy statement about fame, that you could be so famous in certain areas and yet some people still don't know who you are. So,
Well, that was my big question for you. Why do you think people want to be famous? With your expertise, why do people do this?
Well, I'll tell you one thing about fame, not that I've had it, but it's a dangerous drug. It's overwhelming to a lot of people. Too many people get famous when they're too young to handle it. It's a very strange thing. We don't have royalty in this country. Our royalty are our celebrities. And it's a very strange thing when people treat you like no matter what you want, they say yes to it. You know, I've seen it because I've been with some people who are very, very famous, and I see how they're treated. And people treat the people who are with them kind of the same way. So I've had that small experience of that. But it's not healthy. You know, you have to be really mentally fit. When you read, you know, I'm a big Page 6 guy. I read Page 6 every day. I'm friends with all. I've been on the page more than 50 times. And so I've met a lot of very big stars, and so many of them are just insane. Ego is a real problem. You know, in the spiritual world, they teach you to detach from ego. I've been studying spirituality for about 30 years, and people say that's one of the reasons that everyone stops off to talk to me on the red carpet, because I never try to trap anybody. I don't want to put them in an awkward situation. I'm not looking for scoops.
But it is weird. It does feel like at least 30% of the business is in it to be famous, but what is that?
It's very elusive, and it can be very destructive because it's hard to maintain fame for 30 years, you know? If you're in the business world, it's not unusual to have a business running for 30 years or more. But to carry on a career in the entertainment business for 30 or 40 years is not easy to do. You're always reinventing yourself, you know? And so I think it's really hard. A lot of people, these days, influencers are appearing in comedy clubs. Most of them are horrible, horrible. They think just because they have a lot of followers, like I went to a show recently that somebody took me to. I won't say who it was, but it was an influencer that had a few 100,000 followers. And when I looked her up, I said, this woman is not going to be funny. But I went. Luckily, they had a real comedian open the show for her. And he saved the show. I told him after, I happened to know him. He's like, hey, Jeff, how you doing? She was so bad. And they paid her a lot of money, and she only did 40 minutes. Thousands of dollars. They told me how much they paid her. And she did 40 minutes, and not one joke. Nobody left. Everybody was angry. The next day, the person who organized it called people to apologize. That's how bad. So just because they're influencers doesn't make them funny. A lot of actors think they can do comedy too, just because they're used to being on stage. It doesn't work.
Why do you think it's so addicting to make people laugh?
There's just something about making people laugh that is just, it's a very special thing. It's a gift that you give to the world. I used to think about that a lot. Would it be as satisfying if I just snuck up and tickled people and made them laugh? I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think I would like to do that either. But there's just something nice about getting on stage and saying what you think is funny to a room full of strangers and see whether they validate. That's how you know if you're funny. I tell that to people all the time. I do motivational talks for an entertainment company for people that want to break into the entertainment business. And I said, if you think you're funny, there's only one way to find out. Like, I didn't get on stage for many years because I was writing for big stars, and I was nervous to go on stage. The fear was stopping me. And by the time I wanted to go on stage, I thought, man, I better be funny. It'll be so embarrassing if I have this, like I was like an industry name, and I had to give myself the courage to go on stage. But I have 8 books now. One of my books is called Fight the Fear, Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way. And there's a whole chapter on what it took for me to go out on stage for the first time. And it happened to be at New York Comedy Club, and Mike Buscetti was in the audience, I'll never forget. And he came over to me afterwards, he goes, you're so funny, you have to keep doing this. And that gave me the encouragement to keep doing it. Yeah, because I had been writing for people for so many years, and you know, I never wanted to look like a novelty, like a dentist who's in comedy, where I'll be a plate spinner, a knife throwing act, like on the Ed Sullivan Show. I didn't want, so I never told people what my day job was. You know, I only wanted to be respected. That's why I focused on writing for big stars. If I was writing for people no one ever heard of, it wouldn't matter. But if I could say, well, I wrote for so-and-so, and I have this list of well-known people that trusted me to do my material, then people would take me seriously, and that's what I was looking for, you know?
Is comedy able to fill the void?
It's never really filled. There's always more to do, you know, like that video that I showed you. I'm on the verge of doing some really big stuff, some interesting things. You know, that void is always there. There's some need that we have. And if you have a gift, you have to take it wherever it takes you. You never really stop. At least I don't. I'm always thinking of stuff. People say, you're always hustling. It's not like I'm hustling. It's like things come to me.
So Joan Rivers was kind of roasting you to find out your day job. Who was the first comic to really get you?
Joan. Yeah, because I didn't tell. I don't think Rodney may have known, but he didn't care. I mean, we had a fun relationship. I'd hang out with him, you know, in the club, in his dressing room, and in his apartment. Sometimes I'd bring the jokes there. And I'd say, Rodney, look at all the jokes I brought in. And he goes, yeah, Jeff, but they gotta be funny, you know. I can't do a good Rodney impression, but he used to tell me jokes. We'd sit together in his dressing room. He goes, Jeff, what's the difference between Jews and Italians? I'm like, I don't know, Rodney, what's the difference? He goes, they both take a leak in the sink, but the Jews take the dishes out first. And, you know, and one night we were talking about who's hip. I say, who's hip, Rodney? He goes, Jeff, you want to know who's hip? 2 guys in the village. That's it. 2 guys in the village. Rodney was so hip. And he would sit in his just pajamas and a bathrobe. And not a fancy pajamas and a bathrobe either. Just like regular pajamas and a bathrobe. And we would sit and hang out. And I would be laughing so hard. It was one of my greatest thrills to hang out with Rodney. How'd you meet him? Through Dick Capri. Dick Capri was the first comedian that I ever wrote for, who was in the show Catskills on Broadway. But he was being managed by David Jonas. When Alan Zweibel connected me to David Jonas, David took about a year trying to talk me out of being in show business, because he said, you're a doctor, you don't need this, it's a crazy business. But I was still thinking cream cheese on the ankles. He introduced me. It took me a year to learn how to write a joke. And Dick Capri was the first to pay me and to trust me to write jokes for his act. And he would perform at Rodney's place, Dangerfield, where Rodney's is now, on 61st and 1st. And I would always be there with Dick. Wednesday was my show business day. So I was married, and my wife understood that Wednesday, you don't see me, I'm in the city making connections and hanging out at Dangerfield's. And Rodney, I think, asked Dick who was writing those jokes for him, and Dick introduced me to Rodney. And that's how I got started writing for Rodney.
Wow.
And I still have the copies of the checks that he sent me. Yeah, he did my stuff on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. One of the best jokes that I ever wrote for him, which he loved, he would say, like, you know, he had a standard opening. You know, I'm all right now, but last week was rough. He said, you know, he said, I went to one of those custom bed shops. I said to the guy, what kind of bed would you recommend for a guy like me? He said, single. That was it. A one-word punchline. Single. That just, you know, that epitomized who Rodney was. You know, he would always do self-deprecating humor. So it was great. And he said, you know, I only get ugly girls. I went out with one girl who was so ugly, I bent down to pet her cat. It was the hair on her legs. She was a very ugly girl.
And what was like an average night out with Rodney? Like, would he bring you to a steakhouse or something?
No, we hung out in the club.
Okay.
A couple of times I'd go to his apartment, you know, and his daughter was a little kid at the time, Melanie Roy, and I remember he had a pool table in his living room, and it was just amazing for me that he would call me on the phone and we would talk, and I would see him at the club and writing jokes that he would do on The Tonight Show. Wow. He once paid me, I think, $250 for one joke. He said, I'm all right now. Well, last week was rough. He said, I bought one of those whirlpools for my bathtub. The first night I used it, I lost 3 of my best ships. And he liked that joke so much because it was such a clean joke. He goes, that was his opening joke. You know, the opening joke was the one that was the most important when he would do it with Johnny Carson. So I would write him jokes to do on stage and then on panel, because Johnny would always invite him to sit down. And Rodney was not a conversationalist. He would do jokes for the audience, and then he would do jokes in the chair for Johnny Carson. And so then on this wall is my cover story in the New York Times.
Oh, what year is that from? That's cool.
Yeah, they did a cover story on me, 1992. And that picture is of me and Dick Capri and Freddie Roman backstage on Broadway at Catskills on Broadway. And so here's Amy Poehler and Nick Kroll and John Mulaney, and that's the jacket that they made for me. I love Joan Rivers. I had a crush on Joan Rivers, but I never told her. I thought she was so pretty, but I never had the nerve to tell her. And here's Judd Apatow.
Oh, wow.
The great Charles Grodin.
It really is literally a shrine to your memories, huh?
It's unbelievable. There's Jeff Garland down there, who I just saw recently. Well, Robert Smigel did his annual, semi-annual, an event for autism, Night of Too Many Stars. So I wrote to him and he said, of course we want you on the red carpet.
Wow,
so I went,
there, huh?
I went to film. Yeah, that's me in the dining room of the Friars Club, in the Milton Berle room.
What do you miss the most?
What do I miss the most? Okay, when you ask me what I miss the days of the Friars Club. That was a very special time. It's been closed for about 2 years already. And it's an era that will never come back again. You know, the last big stars that were there, I think, were Jeffrey Ross and Lisa Lampanelli. He was very loyal to the Friars Club. It's how he became the roast master general, by doing so well at all the Friars roasts. But it's been closed for a couple of years. It's padlocked. And every time I walk by, it's very sad, because I remember sitting there with all the greats, Milton Berle telling me stories about his teeth, his implants, sitting there just with all the stars, you know, and preparing for the roast. Like I said, for 12 years, I worked with Bob Sachs, who was the producer of the roast for 12 years.
And after all these years in the business, what have you really learned from, 30 plus years in comedy?
Yeah, what have I learned? I've learned that it's hard to be funny. That you have to, it's a real craft. That's why I respect Jerry Seinfeld so much. He's such a great writer. He's a wordsmith. I consider myself a wordsmith. I agonize over words. When I write stuff for myself, I write it and then I rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. I let days go by before I revisit it. Writing jokes is a real craft. Some people get up and they just talk about what they did that day. You know, I just talk about things that I find funny. You know, like lately I'm talking about ripped jeans, you know, ripped jeans. Basically, ripped jeans, when you get right down to it, it's basically just torn pants, right? If you went into a store and you saw a table and a sign said sale, torn pants, it's a good chance you wouldn't take advantage of it, you know what I mean? Good chance you'd pass it up. That to me is funny, because people are wearing such ripped, you know, it's the only article of clothing you could show up in such bad shape and get away with it. You know, you can't show up in a torn shirt, a ripped dress, a suit with holes in the knees. But jeans could be ripped to shreds and people love them. So I saw a girl this week just wearing pockets. That's all that was left. Both legs were completely gone, just pockets. $1,000. To me, that's funny. I like, you know, when you can find things that people can relate to in our everyday life, that you can make fun of and you point it out. To me, that's funny. Yeah, I feel like I was a bad host. You've been here for a while. I didn't even offer you any balloon soup or paper pasta, you know, for people who are watching their weight. Not that you need that, but I always have it handy just in case. So I have a house full of toys because, you know, it's important to have things around, like eggs with legs. When I travel, I look for little toys because, see, I became a motivational speaker, and when I lecture, I teach people how to create what I call a happiness center. And when you have a happiness center, you should surround yourself with things, no matter where you look, there should be something that makes you feel happy. Because once you leave the house, you have no control over what the universe has in store for you. The only place you can control your environment is where you live. So in my home, that's why I have all these pictures. It makes me happy. Pictures of my children. I didn't show you those because they're not comedians, but I have them all over. You know, pictures of people that mean something to you. Bright colors. If you noticed, my carpeting is white, my piano is white. I need brightness. People live in dark apartments and they wonder why they're sad. You know, when you're a sensitive being, and I always say most people are much more sensitive than they want to cop to, especially men. Sensitivity is a great strength that feels like a weakness. So I'm an empath. I feel everything very deeply. So I have to make sure that I'm surrounded by things that make me comfortable. Because I'm sensitive to the weather, to the room I'm in, to colors, to the people that are around me. So I'm very careful about that, and I do that. It's important to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
What do you think the best year you ever lived was? What year? What calendar year?
The year that my two daughters were born. I won't tell you the year because I don't want to give away their age. But having children was the most important thing to me. Being the best dad, that's my goal, to always be the best dad. And my oldest daughter said to me recently, "You were and you are." And that meant so much to me because that's my goal. Everything else, you know, show business is very ephemeral. It's not real, you know. Don't believe the hype. You know, when I talked to you earlier about stuttering, when I went to college, I made myself run for the president of the freshman class, and I told myself if I could win the election, I wouldn't have to stutter anymore, because I had a feeling it had something to do with how people felt about me. I was too young. I was 16 in college. I didn't feel like I fit in. And I won the election. I was the president of the whole freshman class of Hunter College, and I still stuttered, and it was a great lesson. It taught me that outside validation in life doesn't work. It doesn't matter how many people tell you you're fantastic and wonderful and talented. It matters what you think of yourself. And that started my journey to cure myself. And as you can see, not only don't I stutter anymore, but you can't even shut me up. I have a lot to say. I talk a lot. I always have a lot to say. And it's because I'm very grateful that I don't stutter anymore. And as I said, as an avocation, I work with stutterers all over the world, and I teach them how not to stutter. And it has to do with mind control, to control your thoughts, because we're all holding thoughts that are not valid for us. And so it's very important to, and it's very hard to do, to analyze your own thoughts, because you tend to believe your thoughts. But you created all of your thoughts, and not all of your thoughts are true. And your thoughts are not necessarily based on your experience, they're based on your interpretation of your experience, which is why you could have siblings that are completely different people. And if you ask them about their childhood, you'd think they had different parents. So I know you didn't expect a lecture on thought, but it's a very big thing, and it has to do with comedy, with everything. You have to keep your thoughts in perspective.
Well, it makes me worry because social media is
They're changing
false thoughts that appear real.
Social media is changing people's thoughts. And it's funny that you said that. Fear is an acronym, false evidence appearing real. You know, and I like face everything and rise. That's a better acronym for fear. And that's what I've had to do my whole life, conquer fear. So many things make me uncomfortable, but I battle uncomfortability on a daily basis. I never let it stop me. Even now, I'm so nervous.
You're doing great. Thanks, man.